Hey guys, thank you for joining us for another Men's Bible Brief. If you can, join us on Wednesday mornings. The information is on the screen. If not, we got you covered on YouTube right here. Well, let's go ahead and join the brief in progress. God bless you.
Our hump day food for thought is the words you speak become the house you live in. And fellas, I have been guilty of that myself. Words have power. Again, the words you speak become the house you live in. And the author is, if I pronounce this right, Hafiz. Uh, well, our speaker for today is none other than our own great Bishop Willie Hall. Take it away.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, brothers. Today we are in chapter 10 of Disciplines of a Godly Man, and today's chapter will be focusing our thoughts and discussions on the discipline of integrity. Start us off, I'd like to start us off with the two definitions for what I'll be working with in terms of what integrity is. The first definition states that integrity is a state of being whole or complete. And as I was preparing for this, the images that came to my mind were that of an airplane or a ship. Being July, coming up on July, I'm typically in the planning phases of family vacations, and we're looking at taking a cruise or a short flight to somewhere. And so started thinking about the integrity of a boat or a large ship or an airplane, thinking that I wouldn't want to intentionally put myself or my family in harm's way by getting on one of these vessels that wasn't full of integrity. And a ship came to mind, the cargo ship, the Dali, out of India, that most of you might be familiar with, is the cargo ship that crashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Maryland, bringing that bridge down. And consequently, that ship is still in the harbor. The crew is still stuck on board, being detained. And I started thinking about airplanes and one of our darling companies here in America, Boeing, and all the issues that they've encountered over the last 5 years with the grounding of the 737 MAXs after the 2 airplane crashes, or the 737-9 MAX with the door plug where the door flew off the plane in flight. And then even most recently here, a week and a half ago, the Boeing Starliner that launched the other day and took 2 astronauts to the International Space Station. It had 2 canceled launches, and it even delayed the third launch by some hours because they ran into some issues with helium leaks. And shortly after takeoff, they ran into additional issues that they were able to rectify. And finally, as it was preparing to dock with the International Space Station, they had issues with the thrusters. And so the astronauts had to manually take over this and get the thrusters back online. And they missed their initial docking window and had to redock sometime later. And it just brought into question the integrity of Boeing. In fact, Boeing stocks since 2019 have dropped by more than 50% because folks have just lost faith in the organization and the leadership. So we would say that Boeing lacks integrity. And so the second definition is referring to a person and his character, and it refers to the concept of living by one's values and principles, or quality of being honest and having strong moral principles, being morally upright. The author would refer to this as being righteous and honest inside and out. Arthur started this chapter by talking about the alarming crisis of integrity in America. And to understand what he was really trying to say, I Googled the word crisis, and it came back as a disruption or a breakdown in a person or families, and in this case, a country's normal or usual pattern of functioning. And initially, I took issue with the way he was phrasing this because I have my own ideas of America at times, and I didn't see us being in a crisis for only the reason that America has always been the way that we are. I think America is more of a issue of hypocrisy. We say one thing, we aspire to one thing, but we don't hold ourselves accountable for those things. So me, America is more about hypocrisy. which is a situation when someone pretends to believe something that they do or don't really believe that thing that they're doing. It's the opposite of what they say or do at other times. Well, I believe there is an issue with integrity in America, but I think it's been this way since our inception. And the problems with integrity is, integrity, just like moral relativism, is subjective. One size doesn't fit all. What's good for the gander or goose doesn't always compute for the gander. My moral values don't always have to align with your moral values. I could believe strongly in one thing and stand on that and still be considered to have integrity, even if what it is that I believe or I'm standing on is deplorable, if it's unmoral. As long as I'm staying true and consistent with who I am, then I don't lack integrity. And that's an issue, primarily because humankind is fundamentally flawed. We're dishonest and we're bent. Our cultures and our systems are built on legalism. We get to define what's just and what's right. And depending on the season, we can change what's just and what's right, or we can decide who is just for or who is right for. And we don't have to have any consistencies in terms of our practices and our words. And in the survey from the book, The Day the America Told the Truth, the author concluded that, sadly, there was no way to distinguish the Christian from the crook. Statistically, we couldn't tell the difference between the ethical practices of the religious and the non-religious. In fact, Christians are almost as likely as non-Christians to cheat, lie, to bribe, to plagiarize, to steal, disobey laws, or only obey the laws that we feel are relevant to us or that we like. We're just as likely to cut corners or to tell people what they want to hear rather than telling them the truth. Most of us say and do things differently when we're in public than when we're in private. And we believe that just because you can't prove in a court of law or otherwise that I'm being dishonest, then you can't question my integrity or my honesty. But the problem with that is God is always watching and God knows. Very similar to the story that's told in the story about Ananias and Sapphira. These are a husband and wife that sold a parcel of land and went to give the proceeds to the apostles, but they held some back and deceitfully led on as if they were giving them all the proceeds. And as a result of that, God wiped them out. He did away with them. So how do we resolve issues with integrity if it's really always up to us in terms of what we're going to stand on, what we're going to believe on? And I believe that we have to take a godly destination to integrity. The author closes the chapter of godly disciplines of integrity by talking about the habit of being honest. And he ended on a partial quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson, where he says, if you sow an act, you reap a habit. Sow a habit and you reap character. Sow a character and you reap a destiny for yourself, for your family, for your church, for your world. We have to understand that the destination is not simply salvation for us Christians, but it's the heavenly glorification of God here on earth. Meaning, we have to bring heaven wherever we go. We have to be the manifestation of heaven to others here on earth. We're made in God's image. Therefore, our roadmap or our GPS we have to clothe ourselves in the character of God in order to achieve this godly destination. In Exodus 34, 6 and 7, God describes himself to Moses as Yahweh, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness and rebellion and sin. God is essentially introducing himself to the world, to Moses and his people. He wants people to know that he's approachable, that he's not just this God of fire and brimstone, but that he's compassionate. And he wants us to be compassionate And if we're to take on the characteristics of God, then we have to operate in compassion. We have to care for what God cares for. We have to be invested in relieving the suffering of others. If we're going to be men of godly integrity, we have to take on God's grace. We have to pass on the undeserved favor that delights God. We have to surrender our need for vengeance to God and let God deal with people at times. We have to be slow to anger. We have to be able to extend patience others in hopes that they might be restored to God's love. And speaking of God's love, we have to operate with a hesed kind of love, an unfailing, generously abundant love for the sake of love, because God is love. And then finally, if we're going to clothe ourselves in these characteristics of God, we have to be faithful. We have to be honest. Our word has to mean something. We have to be trustworthy and steadfast, for God is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. And so as I was preparing for this and looking at integrity, I was running into some issues in my yard, in my lawn. And some of you might know this, but I'm an avid lawn enthusiast. And at least 3 to 4 days every week out working in my yard, I've spent countless dollars on equipment and fertilizers and other things. I've watched hours and hours of videos on YouTube, just looking for ways to perfect my lawn, to be the envy of the neighborhood. And as I was dealing with this issue, my lawn was recovering from me almost wiping it out last year. I got a little too cocky. I was trying to impress folks that were coming over for a large gathering, and with my lawn typically being a topic of conversation, I wanted to go over the top with it. And as a result, I basically killed it. It was dormant for most of the year. And it took me all of the winter and most of the spring to really to get it to start coming back. And it wasn't happening fast enough for me. So on parts of my land, I had to put down new sod. And finally, as spring was full on, my lawn was coming back. It was green. It was lush. The neighbors were giving me compliments. And then these ugly white things started popping up all over my lawn. And I'm like, oh my God. It just so happens that this May was the third wettest May on record. And for whatever reason, it felt like Houston and the Caribbeans here in North Texas with all the constant humidity. And it was just right for these mushrooms and this fungi to start taking over my lawn. And I wasn't very pleased with that. So I turned to Old Trustful, Faithful, and I went to YouTube and I looked at some videos on how to deal with this and what I needed to do to rid myself of it. And one of the folks I follow, How To with Doc, he talked about being careful as you go to remove the fungus or the mushrooms from your lawn. He went out in his yard with a Tupperware dish and he gently started plucking these mushrooms out of his yard and carefully placed them in the Tupperware. And he explained that you don't want to shake up the mushrooms too much. You don't want to agitate them because they will start dropping and releasing their spores and have even worse of an issue because they would start spreading even more rapidly. So I got to thinking about the fungi in terms of Christians. I went online and started searching fungi, and I came across a website, the Utah State Herbarium, and they had a thing on there called The Hidden Kingdom. And I just want to read to you guys what it said in its first 2 paragraphs that convicted me to put this into this discussion. It says that fungi are not plants. Living things are organized for study into large basic groups called kingdoms. Fungi were listed in the plant kingdom for many years. Then scientists learned that fungi show a closer relationship to animals, but are unique and separate life forms. Now fungi are placed in their own kingdom. It's a hidden kingdom. Part of the fungus that we see is only the fruit of the organism. The living body of the fungus is a mycelium made out of a web of tiny filaments called hyphae. Mycelium is usually hidden in the soil, in wood, or another food source. Mycelium may fill a single inch, or it could grow to cover many acres. The branching hyphae can add over half a mile of total length to the mycelium each day. So I was trying to be careful. It says these webs live unseen until they develop mushrooms, puffballs, truffles, brackets, cups, birds' nests, corals, and other fruiting bodies. And it went on to say if the mycelium produces only a microscopic fruiting body, people may never notice the fungus. And so as I got to thinking about that, I got to thinking about what if we as men, as Christian men, as godly men, what if we understood our mission the same way that fungi understands its missions? What if we were the fungi of God's kingdom? When life or the world or Satan came to shake us up, to get rid of us because we're an unsightly scene in their plans? What if rather than getting angry or being vengeful, what if we allowed the character of God to emanate from our beings like spores? What if the world encountered that piece of heaven that allows them to manifest themselves and the fruit of our lives would spread like the hyphae of the world, increasing God's kingdom, spreading God's gospel? Would other people be convicted by God's character that they experienced in us? Would they experience salvation? And so my closing word to you guys is we have to be like this fungi. And as it relates to the character of God, so that we would be men of integrity, we must be similarly compassionate as God is. We have to operate with the grace that God has extended to us. We have to be slow to anger. We have to operate in the love of God. And then we have to be faithful. And we have to show people that as Christian, as men, that we're trustworthy. And when they realize that we do care, that we are patient enough with them, they can trust what we say. And God can reap the benefits of an ever-growing kingdom. Thank you.